Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Unexpected Encounter ***. The year was 2524, and humanity had become a dominant force across the galaxy, spanning countless systems, encountering strange and hostile alien species, and forging uneasy alliances with a few. The United Earth Federation (UEF) had built sprawling space stations to serve as hubs for trade, diplomacy, and military operations. One of the largest and most influential of these stations, the Orbital Nexus, stood at the crossroads of several important trade routes, a bustling metropolis of neon lights and starry horizons. Captain Riker Steele had been stationed aboard the Orbital Nexus for nearly a year. A seasoned officer with the UEF Navy, Riker was accustomed to the complexity of interspecies diplomacy, but he had always preferred the practical work of space exploration and military strategy. However, today was different. His routine had been abruptly interrupted when an unexpected transmission had come through. The message, encoded in an alien language, was from a race that had been largely unknown to the UEF, the Vdraxi. The Vdraxi were a mysterious species, shrouded in myth and fear. Known for their sharp intellect and cold, calculating demeanor, they had rarely been seen by human eyes, and their intentions were often speculated upon in hushed tones. Yet, for reasons unknown, they had sent a representative to meet with the Federation's top officials on the Orbital Nexus. Riker stood in front of the glass observation deck, his eyes scanning the stars as he waited for the meeting. His dark uniform felt tighter than usual, the weight of the situation pressing on his shoulders. He wasn't sure what to expect from this meeting, but the one thing he did know was that any encounter with the Vdraxi would be significant, whether for better or worse. The sound of a door opening behind him snapped him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw the commander of the station, Admiral Claire Hawk, walking briskly toward him. Her sharp blue eyes locked onto his. "Captain Steele," she greeted him, her voice even and commanding. "The Vdraxi envoy has arrived." Riker nodded, his pulse quickening. "And what's the situation, Admiral? Are we ready for this?" "We're as ready as we can be," Hawk replied, crossing her arms. "We have a dozen military officers, translators, and analysts prepared, but this could change everything." "You've heard the rumors about the Vdraxi, I assume?" Riker nodded again. He had heard whispers of their strength, intelligence, and, most unsettlingly, of their rumored ability to manipulate the minds of weaker species. "Don't worry," she continued, "just keep your cool. We need to understand them, not provoke them." Riker couldn't help but feel a surge of nervous energy, but he had always prided himself on his ability to remain composed under pressure. As they approached the conference room, he felt the weight of history hanging in the air. This could be the first step toward either an alliance or a war. The door opened to reveal a sleek, minimalist room, its walls lined with shimmering metallic surfaces. At the center of the room stood a single table, its surface glowing with soft blue light. Across from the table, two figures stood waiting. One was a Vdraxi envoy, a being of unsettling beauty and grace. It stood taller than any human, its long limbs covered in smooth, dark scales that shimmered with a strange iridescence. Its face was elongated, with sharp cheekbones and piercing eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. The Vdraxi's body was lithe, yet undeniably powerful, exuding an aura of calm and control. The other figure was human, Lieutenant Emily Rhodes, a top officer and translator stationed on the Nexus. She looked tense but focused as she glanced at Riker. "Captain Steele, Admiral Hawk," Emily greeted them, her voice steady despite the tense atmosphere. "The envoy is ready to meet." Riker stepped forward, his heart pounding as he locked eyes with the Vdraxi representative. It was difficult to discern the creature's true emotions. Its face was devoid of any expression. Yet there was something in the way it stood, something almost magnetic that left Riker momentarily speechless. "Greetings, Captain Steele," the Vdraxi said, its voice low and melodic. It spoke flawless Federation standard, though its words seemed to carry an unfamiliar weight. "I am Trock, envoy of the Vdraxi Empire." Riker hesitated for a moment, taken aback by the smoothness of its speech. Despite his training, he found himself at a loss for words. Troc's presence was unsettling. And yet, there was something about the creature's gaze that seemed to draw him in. "Captain Steele," Troc continued, "we have come to discuss matters of mutual interest. The Vdraxi do not often involve themselves with lesser species, but we find ourselves at a crossroads. The Federation has much to offer, and we have much to offer in return." Riker steadied himself, his mind racing. The Vdraxi had come not just for a meeting but for a negotiation, an alliance, or something far more dangerous. He could feel the weight of the decision before him. If the Federation could secure an alliance with the Vdraxi, their military might could secure humanity's place at the top of the galactic hierarchy. But what was the price? Troc stepped forward slightly, the room seeming to grow colder as it did. "But there is something you should know, Captain Steele. We did not come here merely for diplomacy. The Federation has something we require. Something you have been hiding." The air between them thickened. Riker's breath caught. What was the Vdraxi referring to? Something hidden? Riker asked cautiously. Troc's eyes glowed brighter. "Yes. Something that could change the balance of power. A secret that, if revealed, would alter the future of your species. But I believe it is better for you to discover it for yourself." Riker's pulse quickened. The Vdraxi were playing some kind of game, and he wasn't sure if he was prepared for the truth. Emily looked at Riker, then at Troc, her eyes narrowing. She was clearly uncertain of the Vdraxi's intentions, but Riker couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. The conversation continued, but Riker's mind was elsewhere, focused on the promise in Troc's words. There was a truth hidden somewhere, a revelation that would change everything. But how could he prepare for something when he didn't even know what it was? As the meeting went on, the pieces began to fall into place in Riker's mind. The Vdraxi had come to reveal something. Something not just important to humanity but perhaps to him personally. The first thread of a deeper connection began to unravel as the Vdraxi's words lingered in the air. What they revealed would soon lead Riker into a web of political intrigue, strange alliances, and a forbidden romance that threatened to shake the foundation of everything he believed. This was only the beginning. Secrets unveiled ***. The next few hours aboard the orbital nexus passed in a blur of hushed conversations and tense exchanges. Riker Steele could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him more with every passing minute. The Vdraxi envoy Troc had left the conference room only a short while ago, but the implications of what had been said were still gnawing at him. Humanity had always prided itself on being the dominant force in the galaxy. The United Earth Federation (UEF) had expanded its reach through sheer willpower, and now, standing at the edge of this unknown encounter, Riker could feel how fragile that position might be. The Vdraxi weren't just another species. They were an enigma, powerful, enigmatic, and apparently very interested in humanity's future. The Federation had long speculated that the Vdraxi were an advanced race, but no one had expected them to show such an interest in Earth. Not just in the Federation's military might or resources, but in something far deeper, something personal. What did Troc mean when it spoke of a secret? And why had the Vdraxi come to reveal it now? Riker paced back and forth in his quarters, running over the conversation in his mind. The soft hum of the station outside his window seemed distant, almost irrelevant in the face of what was unfolding. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was hidden within the Vdraxi's words, something important, something that might change everything. A chime from his communicator interrupted his thoughts. Riker tapped it, his gaze still distant. "Captain Steele, this is Lieutenant Rhodes. We need to speak." Riker's brows furrowed at the urgency in her tone. Emily Rhodes had been the one to act as a translator during the meeting with Troc, and though her professionalism was unquestionable, Riker sensed there was more on her mind than just the official details of the encounter. The briefing room was one of the few places on the orbital nexus where Riker could count on some semblance of privacy. When he entered, he found Lieutenant Rhodes already seated at the table, her fingers hovering over a holographic screen. Her expression was tight, focused. It was clear something had been bothering her ever since the meeting with Troc. "Lieutenant," Riker greeted, settling into the chair across from her. "What's going on?" Emily's eyes flicked up to meet his. There was a flicker of unease in her gaze before she quickly masked it with professionalism. Captain, I've been going over the data from the meeting and I think we missed something important. Riker's interest peaked. What do you mean? Emily leaned forward, tapping a series of commands into the table's console. The air shimmered briefly as the holographic display came to life, showing a detailed analysis of the Vdraxi envoy's speech. It's subtle, she explained, but there's a pattern in Traka's words. I went through the translation several times, but something didn't sit right with me. She brought up an image of Traka on the screen, its unsettling, elongated features glowing with that strange ethereal light. The face seemed almost human. It wasn't just the alien's height or physical attributes that made it stand apart, it was the way it spoke, how it communicated in a way that was both distant and strangely intimate. Emily pointed to a particular part of the transcript. Notice how Traka mentioned that the Federation has something we require. It wasn't just a matter of political leverage or resources. It was phrased as though there's a deep, personal connection between our species and there's something they need, something we have. Riker raised an eyebrow. I thought they were just here for trade or some kind of strategic alliance. Emily's face remained serious. It's not just that. There's something more. I suspect the Vdraxi aren't just after what we can offer. They're after something far more personal. She hesitated as if unsure of her next words. Captain, I think they're referring to you. Riker sat back, his mind racing. What? Why me? Emily met his gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. I think you're more connected to this than you realize. There's something in your past, something tied to the Vdraxi. I don't know exactly what it is yet, but I'm certain they know more about you than you think. Riker's pulse quickened. He had been raised to keep his past, his history, his personal life, separate from his career in the UEF. But Emily's words struck a chord deep within him. His mind flashed back to the time before he had been stationed on the orbital nexus. The years of covert missions, the strange encounters with alien species, and the secretive nature of the Federation itself. There had been rumors, whispers, but nothing solid, nothing he could truly grasp. Are you saying the Vdraxi have some kind of connection to me? Riker's voice was tight with disbelief. I don't know, Captain, Emily replied, her voice trembling slightly. But I do know that whatever Traka meant by something hidden, it's likely tied to you. We need to find out what that is, and fast. A chill ran down Riker's spine. He had always known that his life was more complicated than it appeared. The scars of his past were buried deep, but they were there, etched into his very soul. And now the Vdraxi, an ancient, powerful race, had somehow uncovered this hidden truth, this secret. Was it possible they had known about him all along? Before he could process further, the door to the briefing room slid open. Riker's head snapped up to see Admiral Hawk standing in the doorway, her eyes dark and serious. Captain, she said, her tone clipped, I just received an urgent message from Traka. They want to meet with you alone. The room fell silent. The request, or demand, depending on how one looked at it, left Riker with no choice. There was no way around this. He had to go. The Vdraxi had chosen him for something and he had no idea what that could mean. Understood, Admiral, Riker said, rising from his seat. His heart thudded heavily in his chest. This meeting would answer the questions that had been plaguing him since Traka's first cryptic words. As he turned toward the door, he felt Emily's gaze follow him, the weight of her concern pressing down on him. But there was no time for reassurances. Whatever awaited him in the meeting with the Vdraxi would be the beginning of a journey into the heart of something much larger than he had ever imagined. Traka awaited him in a private chamber aboard the Nexus, its lithe form silhouetted against a shimmering backdrop of the station's lights. As Riker entered, Traka's glowing eyes fixed on him with an intensity that sent a shiver through his body. There was no denying it now, this was no simple diplomatic meeting. Traka spoke, its voice low and resonant. You have come to understand, Captain Steele. The time has come for you to know what has been hidden. Riker stepped closer, his pulse racing. The truth was within reach, but would he be ready to accept it when it was revealed? The revelation ***. Riker Steele stood in the dimly lit chamber, the air thick with tension as he faced Traka. The The Vdraxi envoy's glowing eyes bore into him, a presence that seemed to penetrate his very soul. Every step Riker took felt like it was leading him closer to something irreversible. The truth that the Vdraxi spoke of, the hidden secret, hovered just out of reach, and yet Riker could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest. Trocka's voice broke the silence. "You wonder what it is we seek, Captain Steele," it said, its tone smooth, almost hypnotic. "You wonder why you have been chosen for this moment?" Riker swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just a soldier. I have no connection to your people." Trock tilted its head, its alien features sharp, almost unnervingly so. "You are more than you think. You were always more, even before you wore the uniform of the Federation. The Vdraxi have known of you for longer than you can imagine." Riker's pulse quickened, his mind racing. "What do you mean? What do you know about me?" Trocka's eyes flickered with a strange intensity, as though it could read Riker's thoughts. "Your lineage, Captain Steele. It is not human. You are not purely human, and neither are the generations before you. The Federation has buried this truth for years, but we have known for far longer." Riker's head spun. His stomach churned as the words settled into his mind. "What are you talking about?" "I don't." His words faltered as a flood of memories crashed through his mind. Whispers from old records, strange flashes of his family's history, things he had dismissed as mere coincidences. But now, standing before the Vdraxi, those memories began to take on a terrifying clarity. "You are of mixed heritage, Captain Steele," Trock continued, its voice softening as it spoke. "The blood of the Vdraxi flows through your veins. You are our kin in ways your Federation would never admit. Your ancestors made contact with us long before Earth reached the stars, and we have watched over you ever since." Riker's breath caught in his throat. The room seemed to spin as Trocka's words took root in his mind. "That's impossible," he said, his voice trembling. "My parents were human." "Your parents were human," Trock interrupted, "but your bloodline is not purely human. You are the product of an ancient union, a union between the Vdraxi and your people. Humans, yes, but not the humans you think you know." Trocka's eyes narrowed, as if gauging Riker's reaction. "You were born into this legacy whether you realize it or not." The room felt smaller, the walls closing in around Riker. His mind reeled. The Vdraxi had always been a mysterious race, distant and enigmatic, and now he was being told that he had some connection to them, that his very being was shaped by something far beyond what he had known. But how could this be? His parents, his upbringing, everything about his life was human, ordinary, nothing out of the ordinary. He had never suspected anything different. Trock took a step closer, its presence now more commanding than before. "You do not remember because the truth was hidden from you, Captain Steele. Your family, your true family, has been carefully erased from history. The Federation has kept the records buried, but I know the truth. You were born of a forbidden bond, and the Vdraxi will never allow such a union to remain forgotten." "Why now?" Riker asked, his voice cracking. "Why come to me now after all these years? Why didn't you reveal this sooner?" "Because the time is right," Trock answered simply. "The Federation is at a crossroads and the galaxy is shifting. The secrets of the past are rising, and you, Captain Steele, are the key to understanding them. You carry the bloodline of both species, and the future of both humanity and the Vdraxi may very well lie in your hands." Riker's mind was a maelstrom of thoughts, a chaotic whirl of confusion and disbelief. "I don't believe you," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I'm just a soldier. A captain. You're telling me that I'm some kind of hybrid?" Trocka's gaze softened, though its eyes still gleamed with an ancient knowledge. "Yes, Captain Steele. You are more than you have been told. The Federation sought to hide your true nature, to keep this knowledge from you, but we knew you would find out eventually. We knew the blood of the Vdraxi would awaken in you when the time came. And that time is now." The words hung in the air like a weight Riker couldn't escape. It felt as though the very foundations of his life were crumbling, piece by piece, revealing a new and terrifying truth. He had always believed himself to be human, a simple product of Earth's tumultuous history. But now that belief was shattered. If what Trock said was true, then he was a hybrid, part human, part Vdraxi. a living testament to a union that the Federation had gone to great lengths to erase from history. You said the Federation hid this truth, Riker said, his voice growing firmer, though his mind still struggled to catch up with the revelation. Why would they do that? What are they afraid of? Trockus' gaze grew more intense, and for a moment, Riker felt as if the Vdraxi envoy was staring directly into his very soul. The Federation fears the power of the Vdraxi bloodline. They are afraid of what you could become. Your unique heritage makes you a bridge between two worlds, two species, and that power is something the Federation cannot control. Riker's mind raced. He had always suspected there were powers at play within the Federation, secrets buried deep within its bureaucratic folds. But this was something far greater, something beyond even his understanding. Why are you telling me this? He asked, his voice rising in frustration. What do you want from me? Trockus' eyes glowed brighter now, a strange and almost hypnotic light. We do not seek to control you, Captain Steele. We seek to unite with you. The Vdraxi Empire is on the verge of a new era, and we need someone like you, a leader, a symbol, to help us bridge the divide between our two species. Riker recoiled. You want me to join you? To become some sort of ambassador, a puppet for your people? His anger flared as he took a step back, his mind filled with suspicion. You want to use me? Not to use you, Captain, Trock replied, its voice soft yet unwavering. We seek to share our knowledge, our power, with you. The union between humans and Vdraxi was never meant to be hidden. It was always meant to bring about a new chapter in our histories. You have the strength to lead both our people into a future of cooperation. Together we can reshape the galaxy. The weight of the offer hung heavy in the air. It was a choice, one that Riker could not yet fully comprehend. The fate of both humanity and the Vdraxi seemed to rest in his hands, and yet the cost of accepting such a union, such a responsibility, was staggering. Riker felt the stirrings of something deeper within him, something that felt like a calling, a connection to the very essence of his being. But would he be able to accept the truth of who he was? Could he really embrace this strange, forbidden destiny, or would he turn away, rejecting the power that had been thrust upon him? The answer was still unclear, but Riker knew one thing for certain. The future was now in his hands, and whether he was ready or not, the galaxy was about to change. The choice ***. The silence between Riker Steele and Trock stretched out, thick and uncomfortable, like a looming storm. Riker stood frozen, his mind racing with the implications of what had just been revealed. Hybrid. The thoughts swirled in his head, the truth both impossible and undeniable. How had he not known? The Federation had hidden it so thoroughly, buried it beneath layers of deception, but the Vdraxi were not wrong. He was not just human, and his legacy, his bloodline, was far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. Trockus' glowing eyes held steady on him, patient, waiting. It was a rare moment of calm in the face of the storm raging inside Riker's chest. The Vdraxi envoy hadn't pushed him. It hadn't demanded anything, not yet. Instead, it had offered him a choice. Chance to lead, to unite the human and Vdraxi worlds. The weight of that decision pressed down on him with the force of a star's gravity. Why now? Riker found his voice, though it trembled at the edges. He wasn't sure if he was speaking to Trock or to himself, but the question hung in the air like a heavy shroud. Why bring all this up now? After everything humanity's fought for, after centuries of war and peace, why come to me? Trock's expression remained unchanged, but its voice took on a deeper, more resonant tone. Because the galaxy is changing. The balance of power is shifting. The Federation has grown too comfortable in its dominance, and it will not survive in isolation. The Vdraxi have watched, waited for the right moment. You, Captain Steele, are that moment? The word struck Riker like a blow. The Federation had always prided itself on being the beacon of unity, the great force that held the galaxy together under the banner of human strength. But in recent years that strength had begun to falter. The rise of other galactic powers, especially the Vdraxi, had been difficult to ignore. The Federation's grip on the galaxy was slipping, and Riker had felt it too. The fragile alliances, the cracks in the unity of the human race, were becoming more apparent. The war that had once seemed like a distant threat was creeping closer, And now Trock was telling him that he was the key to humanity's survival. But was he willing to accept that responsibility? To step into a role that would reshape the future of not just humanity, but an entire species? What happens if I refuse? Riker asked, though he knew he might not like the answer. Trock's gaze softened just a fraction. Refuse, and the Vdraxi will continue without you. We will still rise, still seek our place among the stars. But your people, humanity, will be left behind, caught in the inevitable wave of conflict that is approaching. We can help you, Steele, but only if you are willing to accept the power that flows through you. Riker closed his eyes for a moment, letting the words settle into him. There was a part of him that wanted to reject everything Trock was saying. He had spent his entire life as a soldier, following orders, protecting humanity, believing in the ideals of the Federation. But now, standing in the heart of the orbital nexus, face to face with the truth of his own origins, he felt that old certainty begin to unravel. He wasn't just a soldier. He wasn't just a captain. He was something more. You want me to lead, Riker said, his voice growing steadier with each word. You want me to be some kind of ambassador between our two species, to unite us. But what do I even know about the Vdraxi? How can I just step into that role when I don't even understand what I am? Trock nodded, its expression inscrutable. The knowledge will come, Captain. It is not just a matter of understanding the Vdraxi. It is about understanding your own heritage, the power you carry within you. We will teach you what you need to know. In time, you will come to realize that the bond between our peoples is not just a matter of politics. It is written in your blood. Riker's thoughts spiraled. He had always prided himself on being in control, on having a clear sense of purpose. But now that purpose was slipping through his fingers like sand. The Federation had raised him, shaped him, but it had lied to him, hidden the truth of who he was, what he was. What do you want from me, Trock? He demanded. What's in it for the Vdraxi? Why reveal all this now? The Vdraxi envoy's eyes seemed to glow even brighter, as if the question had stirred something deep within it. What we want, Captain Steele, is the same as what you want. Peace, unity, strength. The galaxy cannot thrive in division. We have lived for centuries and we have seen the chaos that arises when worlds clash, when species fight for dominance. We offer you an opportunity to break that cycle, to create something new. But it requires a leader, someone who can transcend the limitations of both human and Vdraxi ideologies. Riker took a deep breath, his mind a whirlwind. He had always been a man of duty, of orders and structure. But now his choices were no longer clear-cut. He could refuse, cling to the human side of himself that had always defined him, or he could embrace this new identity, this new legacy that was being thrust upon him. The path ahead seemed daunting, but it was one he had to walk. The question was whether he would walk it with strength or with hesitation. As Riker wrestled with his thoughts, Trock remained silent, its unblinking eyes never leaving him. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Riker spoke. How do I begin? Trock's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. You begin by accepting the truth, Captain Steele. The truth of who you are and the role you are meant to play. You will have to make choices, difficult choices. But know this, whatever you decide, the future is yours to shape. Humanity and the Vdraxi stand at the precipice of a new era. Your decision will tip the scales one way or another. Riker's heart pounded in his chest. He felt like he was on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss of uncertainty. But something inside him, something deep and primal, urged him forward. He had been trained to lead, to protect, to make decisions in the heat of battle. And this was no different. The stakes were higher, but the responsibility was still his. I accept, Riker said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I accept my role. I will lead, but on my terms. I will unite humanity and the Vdraxi, but I will do it for the good of both species, not for power or glory. Trock nodded solemnly, its eyes glowing with something akin to approval. Then we begin. There is much to be done, Captain Steele. The galaxy awaits. As Riker turned to leave the chamber, a new sense of purpose washed over him. The weight of the decision he had just made was immense, but he felt no fear. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The future was uncertain, but he had taken the first step toward shaping it. And with that, the first chapter of a new era began. The awakening ****. The following days blurred together for Captain Riker Steele. After his agreement with Trok, the world he once knew, the rigid structure of the Federation, the familiar faces of his crew, seemed distant and foreign. He had become a part of something far bigger, something that transcended the scope of his previous understanding. Every corner of the orbital nexus seemed to hum with a foreign energy, and Riker could feel it in his very bones. The Vdraxi had opened a door and he had walked through it, whether he was ready or not. Though the first step was made, Riker understood the journey ahead would not be an easy one. He had agreed to unite the Vdraxi and humanity, but that goal was far from simple. He had no allies among the Federation's upper echelons, no backing from his own government, and more importantly, no true understanding of what the Vdraxi sought beyond the lofty ideals of peace and unity. To make matters more complicated, Riker's own identity felt like it was being reshaped with every passing moment. He had learned the truth about his bloodline, about his hybrid heritage, but that knowledge had only raised more questions. What were the Vdraxi truly offering him? What did his ancestors do to forge such a bond between their people and the Vdraxi? And how far did the Federation's deception run? Each of these questions was a thread, and Riker knew they would eventually pull apart the fabric of his life, revealing a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to confront. He stood on the observation deck of the Nexus, staring out into the vastness of space. The stars were as beautiful as ever, but now they felt colder, more distant. There were entire galaxies out there, galaxies that would no longer be as safe, as familiar as he once believed. The Vdraxi weren't just another race to coexist with. They were a force in their own right, ancient and powerful. The prospect of uniting them with humanity brought a sense of dread to Riker's chest. He was lost in thought when a soft voice interrupted. "Captain Steele." Riker turned to find Lyra, the Vdraxi scholar who had become his primary contact during his time on the Nexus. She was unlike any Vdraxi he had encountered. While Trok carried the gravitas of a military leader, Lyra's presence was different, calm, analytical, almost soothing in its serenity. Her shimmering violet eyes met his with a mixture of curiosity and respect, but there was something in her gaze that Riker couldn't quite decipher. "Lyra," Riker greeted, forcing himself to smile. "How are you today?" "I'm well, Captain. But I believe it is you who is struggling," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "The transition is not easy. It is rare for one of your kind to accept their heritage so fully, so quickly." Riker exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't think I've had time to struggle yet. Everything's happened so fast. One minute I'm on my ship with a Federation mission, and the next I'm standing here with the knowledge that I'm part Vdraxi. And I don't even know what that means." Lyra's gaze softened, and she placed a delicate hand on his arm. "It means that you are more than human, Captain Steele. It means you are capable of understanding both sides of the equation. The Vdraxi see you as a bridge, someone who can unite our peoples. But this responsibility, it is not an easy one. You will face resistance, not just from the Federation but from within yourself." Riker's heart tightened. "What do you mean?" She paused, as if carefully considering her next words. "You are not simply a human who shares blood with the Vdraxi. You are a vessel for a new kind of power. A power that, if not controlled, could be dangerous." Her violet eyes flickered as she studied him more closely. "You will begin to feel it soon. The awakening." Riker stared at her, unsure of what she meant. "Awakening?" Lyra nodded, her expression serious. "The bloodline you carry is ancient. It is not simply a genetic inheritance, it is an awakening of potential. Your senses will sharpen. Your strength will increase. But the most difficult part will be the way your mind begins to adapt. The Vdraxi have a unique connection to the galaxy, a way of seeing the universe that is far beyond human comprehension. You will start to feel it too, but it will take time. You must be patient with yourself." He looked at her, a mix of apprehension and intrigue. "And what happens if I don't control it? What if I lose myself in it?" Lyra's expression grew somber. "The Vdraxi have witnessed many of our kind lose themselves to their power. It is overwhelming. If you do not have the strength to control it, you risk becoming a vessel of chaos, and that is something the galaxy does not need. That is something I fear you will become if you do not learn to balance both halves of yourself. Riker absorbed her words, feeling a new weight settle in his chest. He had always prided himself on being in control, on keeping his emotions and actions disciplined, but the notion of losing himself, to the Vdraxi power, to the legacy inside him, was terrifying. How could he, a captain trained to command a fleet, control something that lived within his blood, something ancient and beyond his understanding? Lyra's gaze softened, as if sensing the turmoil within him. You are not alone in this, Captain. You have allies both among the Vdraxi and your own people. But it will not be an easy path. The journey ahead will demand much of you. I'm not sure I'm ready for this, Riker admitted quietly, looking out at the stars once more. What if I can't do it? Lyra placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You do not have to be ready, Captain Steele. You only need to take the first step. The path will reveal itself to you piece by piece. And remember, the future is shaped by those who are willing to face the unknown. The weight of her words lingered in the air as Riker stood, contemplating everything she had said. For the first time since agreeing to this strange union, Riker felt something akin to doubt seep into his mind. But beneath that doubt was a flicker of something else, a deep, undeniable sense of purpose. He wasn't sure what the future held, but the path was set and he would walk it. As the day turned into night, Riker made his way to the Nexus's training facility. Lyra's warning echoed in his mind. The Vdraxi blood within him was waking up, and he had no idea what to expect. He knew he needed to prepare, physically, mentally, emotionally. He needed to understand the power he now carried within him before it overwhelmed him. The first step of his transformation had begun, and there was no turning back. He entered the training chamber, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. As the doors closed behind him, Riker took a deep breath. There was no going back now. This was the beginning of the rest of his life. The trials of power ***. The training chamber was unlike anything Riker had ever experienced. It was more than a simple gym or exercise facility. It was a space designed to test the limits of both body and mind, to challenge every instinct and break through every boundary. The walls were made of a metallic alloy, resistant to the immense forces that would soon be exerted upon them. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows over the room's expansive layout. A series of holographic projectors hung suspended above the floor, their blue lights flickering with an almost eerie precision. Lyra had been right. The blood inside him was stirring, awakening in ways that defied logic. Riker could feel it every moment, like a current of energy flowing just beneath his skin, humming at the edges of his perception. It was only a matter of time before it fully manifested. He had to be ready. A low voice came from behind him, breaking the silence. Are you prepared, Captain Steele? He turned to find Trock standing in the doorway, its towering form a stark contrast to Riker's own human frame. The Vdraxi envoy's presence was imposing, yet there was something about its quiet demeanor that suggested patience. It was waiting for Riker to prove himself, to show that he was worthy of the potential that lay within. I'm ready, Riker said, though even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't entirely true. His mind was still reeling from the weight of everything that had happened. The hybrid blood that surged within him, the power he could scarcely comprehend, the impossible task of uniting two vastly different species, it was all too much to process in such a short time. But he couldn't afford to falter now. He had to embrace what was coming for humanity's sake and his own. Trock gave a slight nod. We begin with the basics, Captain. First you will learn control. The word control echoed in Riker's mind as he stepped into the center of the chamber. He didn't know what to expect, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't afford to fail, not now. Not with everything on the line. A sudden hum filled the room and the holographic projectors flickered to life. Before him, a series of shifting, glowing targets materialized, discs of light, each hovering in the air at varying distances. They darted and spun, shifting in unpredictable patterns. Riker instinctively reached for his sidearm, but Trock's voice stopped him. No weapons, Trock said. This trial is not about force. It is about focus. Riker hesitated but then reluctantly released his grip on the weapon. Weapons had always been his crutch, his way of solving problems. But Trock was right. He needed to focus on the power within him, the power that was tied to his Vdraxi lineage. Focus on the targets, Trock continued. Feel the energy within you. Let it flow through you not as a weapon but as an extension of your will. Riker took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. He could feel it now, the faint hum of energy pulsing just beneath his skin. It was like a new sense, something far beyond anything human. He focused on the sensation, trying to isolate it, to understand it. The energy was alive, vibrant, like a river waiting to be channeled. His eyes snapped open as the targets began to move faster, swirling around him in an unpredictable dance. Without thinking, his arm shot out and a surge of energy coursed through his body. His hand clenched into a fist, and with it, the closest target shattered into 1,000 fragments, each piece scattering in a burst of light. Riker stood in stunned silence, staring at his hand, the fragments of the target still floating around him. He had done it. He had, without even realizing it, used the power within him to destroy the target. It was instinct, pure and unfiltered. Control, Trock's voice came again, its tone steady but firm. You must control its steel. The power you just used was instinctive, but without control, it will be your undoing. Riker exhaled slowly, a bead of sweat dripping down his temple. He had felt it, the power that surged through him. It was exhilarating, intoxicating, but also terrifying. The thought of losing control, of letting it slip from his grasp, sent a chill through him. He clenched his fists, focusing on the hum of energy. This time, instead of simply reacting, he tried to guide the energy, to control it consciously. The targets resumed their dance, this time with greater speed and complexity. Riker's heart pounded in his chest, but he fought to keep his breathing steady. He reached out again, extending his hand, but this time the energy felt different. It wasn't a reckless surge, it was a calm, deliberate force. The first target swerved toward him, and with a slight motion of his hand, it stopped in midair. The second target followed, hovering motionlessly before him as if waiting for his command. Riker held his focus, allowing the energy to flow through his body, guiding it with the precision of a master. One by one the targets fell into line. Riker controlled them all, the energy within him obeying his every thought. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was progress. Trock stepped forward, its eyes glowing with approval. Good. You are beginning to understand the nature of your power. But remember, control is not just about restraint. It is about choice. You must decide how to wield this power, when to use it and when to hold back. Riker nodded, sweat still dripping down his face. I understand. I think. Trock's expression softened slightly, though its demeanor remained serious. This is only the beginning, Steel. The true test of your strength will come when you are forced to choose between power and compassion, between destruction and creation. You will need both to lead. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Riker could feel the weight of them. The power inside him was undeniable, but it was still raw, untamed. He needed to learn to wield it wisely, to balance the fierce energy with the calmness required for leadership. If he failed, if he allowed his newfound abilities to overtake him, he would become a danger not just to his enemies, but to the very people he swore to protect. Trock gestured toward the far side of the room, where a series of dummies stood, designed to simulate combat scenarios. Now we will test your reaction time. You must learn to use your power in battle, to respond with precision, not instinct. Riker nodded, feeling the fire of determination rise in his chest. This was what he had signed up for. This was the true test. He wasn't just going to lead humanity through a galactic peace process, he was going to have to defend it. And to do that he needed control. The first dummy advanced toward him, and Riker's hand instinctively shot out. A blast of energy surged through his body, striking the target and sending it crashing to the ground. He barely registered the impact before the second dummy charged. This time he was ready. He reached out, his mind sharp and focused. The energy within him swirled in response, a twisting wave of force. As the second dummy neared, Riker twisted his wrist, and the blast sent the target flying backward, crashing into the wall with a deafening crack. The chamber echoed with the sound of destruction, but Riker felt only the quiet hum of the power that flowed through him. And for the first time he felt something more. Control. The breaking point asterisk asterisk. The training had become increasingly intense over the past few weeks, pushing Riker to his limits both physically and mentally. Each day he stood at the edge of something he could not entirely understand, wielding a power that threatened to consume him. The more he learned to control it, the more he realized just how fragile his grasp was. The Vdraxi blood within him, which had once seemed like a gift, now felt like an ever-looming storm, waiting to break free. The chambers of the orbital nexus had become a familiar place, their sterile mechanical atmosphere a constant reminder of what was at stake. But even as Riker honed his abilities under the watchful eye of Trock and Lyra, he could not shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. He stood on the observation deck once more, gazing out at the infinite expanse of space. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man caught between two worlds, two destinies. The Federation, his original home, seemed a distant memory now. The Vdraxi had shown him what was possible, what he could be. But what did it mean for humanity? Was he truly the bridge they had hoped for, or was he becoming something else entirely? Riker's thoughts were interrupted by a soft, familiar voice. Captain Steele. He turned to find Lyra standing beside him, her luminous violet eyes fixed on him with an expression that was both curious and concerned. Lyra, Riker said with a nod, trying to mask the weight of his inner turmoil. I didn't expect you here today. I could say the same for you, she replied. You have been withdrawing lately. I can sense it, your struggle is growing. Riker sighed deeply. It's hard to keep my focus. Every time I think I have a handle on this power inside me, it slips away. It's like there's always something more, something deeper. I don't know if I can control it much longer. Lyra studied him silently for a moment, her gaze searching. Control is a complex thing, Captain. What you are experiencing is not just about power, it is about identity. You are not only struggling with the Vdraxi heritage inside you. You are struggling with yourself. He let the words sink in. You're saying I'm not just fighting the power, I'm fighting who I am? Lyra nodded. Yes. You were always human, Captain Steele. You identified with that, you built your life around it. But now you are something more. You have Vdraxi blood and with it an entirely different way of thinking, feeling, seeing the world. You are no longer just the man you were before. That is the part you must learn to accept. But I don't know how, Riker admitted, his voice low. I can't even get a handle on the power itself, let alone figure out who I am with it. I'm not sure I'm cut out for this. Maybe it was a mistake. Lyra stepped closer, her tone softening. You are not alone in this, Steele. Every being with a legacy, whether human or Vdraxi, must reconcile their past with their future. But it is not a battle that is won in isolation. You must learn to accept your dual nature. Only then will you truly control what is within you. Riker looked out at the stars once more, feeling a cold sense of dread settle deep within him. I wish I knew what the future held. I'm supposed to be the one leading the charge. But the more I learn, the more I feel like I'm falling behind. Lyra's gaze softened, and she placed a gentle hand on his arm. That is the burden of all leaders. But remember this, Captain. True leadership is not about knowing everything or controlling every situation. It is about making choices in the face of uncertainty and leading with the conviction that you are doing what is right. Whether you succeed or fail, that is what will define you. Her words lingered, but Riker felt no comfort. He knew she was right, yet the weight of responsibility pressed down on him more heavily than ever. A sudden, sharp beep interrupted the moment. Riker's communicator, hidden beneath his uniform, vibrated with urgency. His fingers immediately shot to it, and his eyes narrowed as the display blinked to life. Captain Steele, came the voice of Commander Valerie Cade, his trusted first officer. We've received a priority distress signal from the Federation fleet. A coalition of rogue fleets, under the banner of the Terran Exiles, has launched an attack on a Federation colony. It's a full-scale assault, they're targeting civilian infrastructure. We need you on the bridge now. The words hit Riker like a ton of bricks. The Terran exiles, those who had broken away from the Federation years ago, disillusioned by the government's policies, had always been a threat. But this was different. This wasn't just a political strike, it was an act of violence that endangered countless innocent lives. And Riker was expected to lead the charge to stop it. Lyra stepped back, her expression unreadable. "This is your moment, Steele. You must choose now. Will you lead with the power you've acquired, or will you let fear control you?" He clenched his fists, feeling the energy inside him stir. There was no turning back. The power he had struggled with, the Vdraxi heritage that had once seemed like a burden, was now his only weapon against this threat. "I'll lead," Riker said with resolve, his voice steady despite the storm raging within. "I'll do what needs to be done." Lyra gave him a final, approving nod. "Then go. And remember, Steele, leadership is not about defeating your enemies. It is about protecting those who cannot defend themselves." Without another word, Riker turned and made his way to the bridge, his footsteps echoing in the cold, metallic halls of the orbital nexus. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, his body tense with anticipation. This was the moment he had trained for, the moment when his past, present, and future would collide. As he entered the command center, Commander Cade was already at her post, her eyes focused on the incoming data streams. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with the weight of the situation. "Captain," Cade said, turning to him as he approached. "The exiles are already making their move. They've disabled the colony's defenses. We're their next target. Our fleet is ready to engage, but we need a clear strategy." Riker took a deep breath, letting the cold clarity of the situation wash over him. His hand hovered over the tactical display, and for a moment, everything fell into place. He knew what needed to be done. He knew the power inside him was not a tool for destruction. It was a tool for creation, for protection. The storm within him raged, but Riker found his center. He would not be the weapon they feared. He would be the protector they needed. "Set course for the colony," he ordered, his voice unwavering. "We will stop them. Not with fear, but with unity. We'll show them that humanity will not be defeated." As the ship's engines hummed to life, Riker Steele stood tall, not as a man divided between two worlds, but as a leader forged in the fires of uncertainty. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time he felt ready to face it. And as the stars stretched out before them, Riker knew one thing for certain. He was no longer just a soldier. He was something more. Something capable of leading both humanity and the Vdraxi toward a new, united future. The battle was about to begin. And Riker Steele was ready. The heart of unity ****. The hum of the ship's engines reverberated through the walls of the command center, an unrelenting pulse as Riker Steele stood at the center of the war room, staring at the display screen. The Federation fleet had mobilized quickly, assembling a defensive formation around the colony. But the rogue fleets of the Terran exiles had come in full force, a patchwork of ships cobbled together from former military hardware and stolen technology. They were formidable, but Riker knew their greatest strength wasn't in their firepower, it was in their conviction. The exiles were fighting for their vision of the galaxy, and they were willing to destroy everything that stood in their way to achieve it. "We're outnumbered, Captain," Commander Valerie Cade said, her voice steady but laced with concern. She pointed to the visual display of the battlefield. "Their fleets are already surrounding the colony's outer defense perimeter. We'll need to break through to evacuate the civilians." Riker's gaze sharpened. "How many civilian ships are there?" "Over 100, Cade replied. "Most of them are already in the process of fleeing, but the exiles are targeting the weaker vessels. If we don't intervene soon, we'll lose them." Riker turned to his left, where Lyra stood, her gaze fixed on the display, her expression unreadable. She had been silent during the briefing, but he could feel the weight of her presence beside him. She wasn't just here as his ally, she was here because she understood the stakes, understood what it meant to balance power with compassion. The Vdraxi were an ancient race, but it was humanity that had given Riker the strength to lead. "Riker," Lyra spoke quietly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "You've trained for this. You know the power inside you, but now is the time to show them what humanity is truly capable of. His mind flashed back to the training sessions with Trock, where he had learned control, how to use the energy within him not just for destruction but for precision, for protection. He had come a long way from the raw, uncontrolled force that had nearly consumed him. Now he needed to use that same power to defend the very people he had sworn to protect. "Prepare the fleet," Riker said, his voice filled with unwavering determination. "We're going in. We will break their formation and cover the civilian ship's escape route. I want everyone ready for evasive maneuvers. This is going to be a fight." Cade nodded sharply, her fingers flying across the controls as the fleet began to shift into battle formation. Riker felt a surge of energy ripple through him, the Vdraxi blood inside him pulsing, ready for the fight ahead. He could feel it now, the power in his veins more controlled than ever before. It was not just a weapon, it was a tool, a means to an end. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes never leaving him. "We must hold back, Riker. The Vdraxi power is vast, but it is destructive. Use it to protect, not to obliterate." He nodded, the weight of her words settling deep within him. He had come to understand that the true challenge wasn't just about wielding power, it was about knowing when to use it. The exiles had their conviction, their belief that they were in the right, but Riker had something stronger. His resolve to protect those who could not protect themselves. "Let's do this," he said, taking a deep breath. The battle outside was already in full swing as Riker's ship tore through the void of space, heading toward the front lines. The enemy fleet, a mishmash of ships painted with crude insignias and makeshift weaponry, opened fire as soon as they saw the Federation vessels approaching. Their missiles and energy blasts shot toward Riker's fleet, but the ships in his command expertly dodged, moving with a precision that had been drilled into them for years. "Steady," Riker murmured to himself, feeling the hum of energy building inside him. The power surged, but he controlled it, kept it contained. It was no longer a storm, it was a steady current, flowing where he directed it. He reached out with his mind, feeling the fabric of space around him, the ships in his fleet, the enemy formations. "Captain," Cade's voice came over the comms. "We're in position. The civilian ships are behind us, but they're being pursued by an exile dreadnought. We need to neutralize it before it gets too close." Riker's gaze flicked to the tactical display. The massive dreadnought, a hulking vessel bristling with weapons, was charging straight for the fleeing civilians. If they didn't take it down, there would be no escape. "Move the fleet into position," Riker ordered. "I'll handle the dreadnought." He didn't wait for confirmation. With a deep breath, he pushed his senses outward, focusing on the ship's energy systems. He could feel the ebb and flow of the dreadnought's power, its weak points, the energy pulses running through it. He could sense the moment the ship fired its main cannon, a colossal blast aimed directly at one of the civilian ships. The blast ripped through the empty space, a deadly force that would obliterate anything in its path. Riker's hand shot out in front of him, and the energy within him erupted, swirling around his body like a vortex. The power surged through his arm, and with a sharp motion, he directed it toward the incoming blast. The beam of energy, nearly the size of a small moon, splintered mid-flight as Riker split it with his own energy, redirecting it into harmless space. The explosion of energy crackled through the void, but the dreadnought had lost its target. "Nice work, Captain," Cade said, her voice laced with awe. But Riker didn't have time to bask in the moment. The dreadnought was still closing in. He clenched his fists, focusing once more on the ship, on the weapon systems and engines. This time he didn't hesitate. A pulse of energy shot from his hand, carving through the vast distance between him and the enemy ship. It struck the dreadnought's outer hull with pinpoint precision, rupturing its weapons array and sending shockwaves through its systems. The dreadnought slowed, its engines sputtering. But it was still a threat. "We need to finish this," Riker muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowed in concentration. This wasn't just a fight for control over power. This was a fight for humanity's survival. A fight to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. With a final surge of energy, Riker reached out again, this time expanding the force of his power, covering the entirety of the dreadnought's structure. He could feel the ship's internal energy shifting, its systems going haywire under the strain. The massive vessel groaned in response, and with a final, catastrophic explosion, it split apart, its debris scattering into the cold expanse of space. "Target neutralized," Cade reported. "The civilian ships are clear." Riker let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The battle wasn't over, but the immediate threat had passed. He looked toward the remaining exile forces, the gap between the Federation fleet and the retreating enemy widening. They had won this skirmish, but the war was far from finished. Lyra stepped up to his side, her eyes locked onto him with a quiet pride. "You did well, Steele. You're learning to balance it." He nodded, but deep inside, a part of him knew this was only the beginning. The exiles wouldn't give up so easily, and the power inside him, though more controlled now, still posed a challenge. But for the first time since he'd been thrust into this role, Riker felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't just fighting for humanity anymore. He was fighting for unity, for a future where all races could coexist and thrive. And as the Federation ships regrouped, Riker Steele stood ready. For the first time he was at peace with the power within him. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.